Good morning, directors, staff, the Fifth Estate, members of the public. Welcome to the Infrastructure Services Committee meeting of Thursday, July 18th, 2019. Also welcome, of course, to the vast audience who will be listening to this on audio recording. It's coming to you from the territory of the Sechelt First Nation. And our word today, because it is the anniversary of the Apollo landing, is apogee. Apogee is the farthest point in an orbit, and it's also the farthest or highest point, the culmination of something. So perhaps we will have an apogee this morning. We have on the agenda, first, the adoption of the agenda. Do I see any changes to the agenda this morning? No? Do I see a motion to adopt the agenda? Seconded? All in favor? Thank you. All right, and our very first thing up is a delegation from Ian Wynn and Ruth Simons of the Howe Sound Biosphere Region Initiative Society. Welcome.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair McMahon, and thank you, directors, and thank you, staff, for getting us this time before you today as a delegation on our discussion point being the UNESCO Biosphere for Howe Sound, the designation for that, and the work update for some of you, maybe new information for others, but overall, I think that we have advanced through our nomination document with a great deal of work from different communities around Howe Sound, and we're at the point now where we need to either reintroduce it or introduce it to new boards and councils that have come around since the last election, and also to fill in the blanks in our document regarding endorsements, and that's the word that's used by the Biosphere organization, UNESCO, and we'd like to explain a little bit about it, make sure everybody understands. There was a motion resolution in 2017 when I sat at that table regarding the UNESCO Biosphere and the support from the SCRD. We'd just like to reaffirm that. I'll hand it over to Ruth now, and she can explain the biosphere, and of course we want to get to questions as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for having us. I have been working towards this aspirational goal of having this amazing place, Howe Sound, Akatsum, Howe Sound, territory of the Squamish Nation, designated by UNESCO under their framework of the Man in the Biosphere program for about 3 years now. We'll give you a little bit of just a brief background on what UNESCO Man in the Biosphere is, why Howe Sound, and what we're talking about when we're talking about the Howe Sound region and where we're at in the process. We'll do that really briefly and then really welcome your questions. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization developed the Man in the Biosphere program in the early 70s when it was being recognized that people were losing their connection with nature. And as populations grow and development grows, there was a need to ensure that we protect our biodiversity and also ensure there's ongoing research and education that ensures that people understand their connection and importance to nature. Later on, as the years progress, development is inevitable, and the focus moved towards how people are interacting in their environment with regards to development. So big focus on sustainable development. The United Nations developed the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. That is, so one of the roles that we have as a biosphere organization is to help people understand what those 17 Sustainable Development Goals mean. We also, United Nations has, as you're aware, developed UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So it is also an important part of the Biosphere program. So today, the Man in the Biosphere program continues to evolve with UNESCO. And if you to look at the document or any of the information around that, I refer to the UNESCO website and the Seville strategy. So I can provide you with links or any information you have there. And it does talk about the role of government in the Biosphere program. Just to reiterate, it is not it's not another level of government. It does not impose in any rights and titles. It doesn't impose in any laws. It is an aspirational objective that governments nominate the regions towards these aspirational goals of biodiversity conservation, sustainable development, and that the Biosphere Organization provides logistical support, meaning that an organization would help to support those working towards those objectives in the region. The Howe Sound region, for many years now, and some of you were there in those days when all the governments around the Sound voted and put forward a resolution to UBCM that the region have a comprehensive, holistic land and marine use plan, with Howe Sound being from Gibsons over to around the Lighthouse Park in West Vancouver, all the islands in between, right up to just south of Whistler. That's the boundary, and it's the height of land, so all the waters that drain down into Howe Sound. As we know, there's many different overlapping jurisdictions, and there's a partial plan, the Squamish Sea to Sky Land Resource Management Plan, and the Squamish Nation Hayatameh Plan, but it only covered part of Howe Sound. So for a long time we've been talking about, wouldn't it be good to have a holistic land and marine use plan for this beautiful region? That is still an objective under the framework of the Man in the Biosphere program, to work together towards having this holistic plan, which is just the means to bringing people together to conversation around how we're managing this area. So the Biosphere program, in order to qualify, the reason that, again, that we feel that the framework for the Man in the Biosphere program is appropriate, has been hearing the voices of people at the Howe Sound community forums over the years, the various different community forums, talking about their common values. What do we really value about this region? And those common values speak to, again, these objectives within the Man in the Biosphere framework. So in order to be designated by UNESCO, they have a very lengthy nomination document, which we are at draft 2 of having completed all the questions in this document, so we're up to about 290 pages. And we are hoping to submit our nomination document this year, which would mean that the earliest that we could be designated would be in 2021. So at this point, I'm just beginning that process to reintroduce to the various councils and boards, reminding that there had already been an expression of support for this initiative, and now we have our document, that we're here to answer the questions and look to seek that, again, the Sunshine Coast Regional District would support this designation. Happy to take any questions.
Director Lee.
I was just wondering if the document was on the web, so if we wanted to read it, we could.
Not yet. No, it's not, but I have it printed off here, and I'm happy to, depending on who it is that wants to read it, I'm very happy to share that.
Thank you.
Director Theis.
Are there any expectations by UNESCO that any kind of protections, legislative protections, will be put in place once it's designated a biosphere? Or, because as I understand it, there's no real legislative power behind the designation at this point.
Right. So in order to qualify, first of all, we need to, UNESCO has to agree to the core protected, to our proposal, which is there's 3 zones within every biosphere. You have your core protected areas, and those are already under existing legislative protection. So in our case, what we're proposing is to be the 5 high elevation provincial parks around the Sound: Cypress, Garibaldi, Tetrahedron, Tantalus, and Pinecone Burke. And as well as in the marine environment, we would be proposing our refuges for the glass sponge reefs and Halkett Bay Marine Park. And that would be our core. And then UNESCO is really puts a lot of emphasis on the buffer zones between the core protected area and what they call the transition zone, where there's lots of activity. So it is that buffer area that we seek to improve, and that would be through furthering efforts for furthering conservation efforts.
I have a question that I think Ian is uniquely qualified to answer. What effect would this have on the Area F OCPs?
Thank you. It would have no effect on the OCPs directly, although the OCPs in the process of rewriting OCPs, Twin Creeks in process now, West Howe Sound and Hillside, it would serve the OCPs well to recognize that there is a biosphere region that is established and that there are certain values within that biosphere region that have been identified already, and that when it comes time for using the OCP for whatever purpose, it's a tool and a living document, that would be another value set that could be referred to by whoever wants to interpret or use the OCP for their purpose. And so it provides another value set that we've all agreed to and look to.
Director Beamish.
Yes, good morning. There's current and future industrial plans around the boundary, around the shorelines for Howe Sound. Would this affect those plans, that planning, would that, or the current or future operations of those activities?
Yeah, we hope that even this conversation before we'd even be designated, I think there's already an awareness by a lot of the industrial proposals of the interest in holding them to a very high standard. Our environmental assessment processes are intended to ensure that developments are done in a very sustainable way. Squamish Nation have their own environmental assessment process and all conditions are placed on them. So short answer is it doesn't stop anything, but it encourages and really supports best practices. And just one more addition I should add to that is that there's a very big emphasis on biosphere reserves on monitoring and research. And there is a lot of that going on in Howe Sound. So the development of that, or one of our organization's objectives is to have a more centralized database or a place to go for information on biodiversity and facts about the region.
Director Pratt.
Just to tag on to Director Beamish's question, how have the industrial stakeholders and commercial and corporate stakeholders in this area, how have they been part of the consultation process and conversation process and moving forward on the biosphere project?
Well, over the last 3 years, I have been presenting to chambers of commerce, tourism organizations. So wherever there's an opportunity, the Howe Sound Community Forums for proponents, for businesses to come and hear and learn. They've certainly been they've been there. We have, within the capacity that I have, been able to reach out to a number of different business owners commercial and industrial business. And we have so far a very positive response. Quoting Bing Giroux of Wood Fiber LNG, he's supportive of this. It's not a park. So, yeah.
I'll just add to that too is a very big part of the UNESCO Biosphere, Amana Biosphere program is striking that balance between the economy and the environment. And that's why it's so important that we engage. We do have working groups, and those working groups include people from forestry and from other industries around Howe Sound are invited to join those working groups. And I've been focusing on the West Howe Sound part of it and drawing in people that represent the forest industry and can contribute. And at the Howe Sound Pulp and Paper, we want to engage with them. So it's very important to find that balance and to encourage that balance between environment and the economy, and certainly invite all to the table.
And on the governance or the structure of the organization of how we would move forward together, we would have roundtable meetings, which would absolutely, the people at the table would represent all the different sectors.
Director Ties.
I guess my question is, what would you want from us at this point in time? A renewal of the commitment, or a letter, or let us know.
Right. Well, the letter that I enclosed is asking for a signature in the document, as simple as that, which is really endorsing the proposal. And a letter strengthens that, but its minimum is a letter. And it really, but what I'm hoping is, and I think what's really important is that those that are endorsing understand it, and that they are, you really are supportive, and that there's an interest in supporting this designation, not only just as a nice label, but truly to its objectives and its aspirations.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Ruth and Ian, for the presentation. And I have to thank you for. I think what you've modeled kind of. I would say, in knowing you and the work that you've done, you probably have connected with more local governments and stakeholders and interest groups around the Sunshine Coast than I don't know anyone else. So I think you're modeling the behavior, kind of, I think, what we're trying to do. And while a biosphere is not legally or financially binding, it is an influential document, both locally and globally. And the values embedded in that, I think, are in our OCPs and our behavior and our value statements and our strategic plans in the past and moving forward. I'd be happy to move a recommendation that the regional district continues to support and to work with. I don't want to draft a letter here, but I would be happy to make a recommendation that the regional district, before the board meeting next week, draft a suitably endorsed letter that has some significance to it, and that the designated person, whether that can be the chair, it can be designated to staff, I believe other areas do, so to work something out in the next week to bring to the board next week, that would be kind of what I'm looking at as a motion, and we could kind of just work a little bit about the language if there's some support.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. If you refer to page 2 in our agenda package, I think you'll find the wording that you're looking for.
I like the wording. I was looking at the Mount Arrowsmith the nomination and the different local governments that had endorsed, and there's a variety of endorsement letters and support letters. Some are short, some are long, and my preference would be to work together in a collaborative means with the proponents to come up with the intent of an endorsement for the nomination with some particular language is, I think you're probably coming to the regional district. Area F is the height of land, pretty much, so the land portion of the regional district is almost a 1-to-1 ratio or correlation with West Howe Sound. So I prefer something a little bit more than just the letter or these words, because it's up to the local government to decide the intent or the what more they want to put into it. So I would leave it to staff and the chair to come up with the language and the proponent. So I'm comfortable with addressing it to staff and the chair to come up with some influential language.
Okay, I would like to clarify the motion. Do we have a motion here? Yeah, well, let's clarify it before we second it. Do we have a motion, or? Okay, try again.
Okay. I would move that the SCRD supports the endorsement of the applicant's request, and that staff and the chair work together to come up with a suitably addressed wordsmith letter that can be presented to the board at the next board meeting, and that's July the 25th.
Do I see a seconder? Yes, I see a seconder. So we have a motion on the floor. Any further discussion? All right, Director Beamish?
Yeah, just further back to the industrial. Ian, have you talked to West? Have you talked to Howe Sound Pulp and Paper, and how are they? What's their perspective on this? Is there?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I have reached out to the mill manager there, and they're in the middle of a shutdown right now at the mill. The boiler is shut down. So he wasn't able to take the opportunity today, when Ruth has made the trip over, to meet with us today. But he's very open to meeting and wants to hear more about UNESCO biospheres and wants to understand what it is as a major industrial economic driver for the coast, being the mill.
Yeah.
I'm sure they want to understand what it's all about.
As the largest employer in their expansion plans and things of this nature. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. I'd like to propose an amendment to the motion, and that we add that the chair be a signatory on the document.
Okay. And we have a seconder for that motion, for that amendment to the motion. All right. Do we have any discussion of the amendment? All in favor of the amendment? Thank you. Now, back to the motion. Any further discussion on the main motion? No. Seeing no further discussion, all in favor? Any opposed? No. Thank you very much. That passes.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much, and we look forward to, over the next week, working on that letter of support with you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Super. I think our next order of business, would somebody like to move the receipt of all of the reports? And the presentation material, yes. I see a seconder. Thank you. All in favor? All right, we have received everything. Wow, we're moving along. All right, and now our favorite part of every agenda is the water supply update.
Thank you, Chair. What I'm going to do is I'm going to request you, if you move a little bit aside. I prepared a couple of slides. And it works. These slides will provide a little bit more inside information on top of the water supply update I verbally provided at last week's board meeting. If there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them at the end. So, talk a little bit about what's the weather forecast, short-term, long-term, Chapman Creek system, and touch on very briefly on the Eastbourne system. So in terms of the weather forecast, the rain and moderate temperatures we had the last several weeks were not forecasted. And I spoke to some forecasters at the Environment Canada, and they were also surprised with the amount of rain we received. In our case, I think it helped us out a lot in terms of our water supply, but nevertheless, it was not anticipated. The current short-term water forecast, however, is warmer and drier, and the likelihood of that to happen is significant. The long-term forecast that's also depicted on the picture on the right, that's the most recent long-term forecast from Environment Canada in terms of temperatures, and the dark red zones are the zones where there is 100% certainty of higher than normal temperatures, and the southwestern part of BC is completely included in that. And the temperatures also in the short term, next week will go to the mid-20s on the coast, so that's significant. That is higher than we had over the last several weeks. What does it mean for supply? We are in stage 3 since June, late June. Chester Well is online since in June. Cray Creek, thanks to approval from Vancouver Coast Sahel, is online, will go online shortly as well. Chapman and Edwards, due to the rain events, are both near the top of the dams, and Chapman Valve has been open frequently last several weeks, and it's currently closed, but I expect it to open maybe by tomorrow. We have to see what the creek flow does. So talking about the creek flow, this is since June 7th, so the date stage 2 was went into effect, and the 200 liters a second, I think it's easy to spot where that is because those are the flat lines. So those were the days that the valves were at Chapman were open, and actually they were open always about a day earlier because of the delay to get water from Chapman to us, from the lake to us. You also can very clearly see the rain, the impact of the rain we had early last week, around July 11th, 12th. That really made us go to about 6,000 liters a second and drop back. And we had a little bit of rain early this week, and that created another spike. It was interesting that the big rain event that happened on the Thursday to Friday night 2 weeks ago here on Selma Park, which caused a lot of erosion, we had 0.7 millimeters at the lake, nothing. So it clearly shows that there's no correlation, there's frequently no correlation between what's happening here and at the lake. Last Monday was afternoon, was a dry afternoon here, and we had 10 mil plus at the lake. So that caused that second spike, what you see there. That's just because it wasn't raining here, but it was raining at the lake. So for the next several weeks, no rain in the forecast. So I expect that we have to open the valves again in upcoming days to sustain the 200 liters a second. What does demand has been doing? What has it been doing? So the darker orange, that's the amount of water that has been produced through our wastewater treatment plant, and there's a small light orange yellow bar on top. That is the amount that has been produced by our Chester Well, and Cray Creek has been offline up until today. The dark blue line is the targeted demand for each stage, stage 2 and 3. Stage 2, it's about 15,000 liters, and stage 3 is about 12.5. And because we know that the community is not able to meet that demand yet, given the uptake on the water conservation measures to date, we also work with an anticipated demand, and that's the light blue line. And you can see that due to the rain, we have been able, while we are at stage 3 since late June, we have been able to be below that anticipated demand. but you can see that clearly on the warmer days we've been approaching it. So it will be really interesting to see in the upcoming week what will happen with the demand. I expect it to climb over 14 towards the 15, and maybe on the warmer days even 16. And it's not, yeah, okay, I'll leave it there for now. So what does it mean for our stages? I don't expect any stage change to be required at least until mid-August, given where we are currently with our water supply and the weather forecast. The rains, if we get any rain or not, and demand will really drive our ability to supply water to the community, but shortly all our major supply sources will be online. If water conservation efforts by the community continues as they are right now, or maybe increases, then I don't see that there's a chance that we will be running out of water anytime in October if we have an extended drought, which is good news, which is a different situation that we had a month and a half ago, where we were like, will we be able to make it? And I now certainly can say yes, we won't be running out of water if we have an extended drought. But nevertheless, it all depends on what the demand will do in terms of demand in the upcoming weeks. What is interesting there is if you look a little bit more in detail at the graph, the difference between the demand during the rain events, which is about 11.7 below 12, and 14 even towards 15 during the drier days. That difference is caused by, of course, people hand watering, because that is allowed and you're not hand watering when it's raining. But the difference is too big to only be contributed to hand watering. So we suspect that there are still, and we know from evidence as well, that there are still a number of numerous people on the coast with automated sprinkler systems with rain sensors that the moment the rain hits, they shut off, and that's why the demand goes down, but they go up afterwards again. So lawn watering is still continuing on the coast. So that demand, that currently not permitted demand, that will primarily drive how far up the demand will go in upcoming weeks. Talking about outreach, education, and enforcement. Since the date I included here, June 27th, but these data are from June 22, from last meeting to current meeting. We received about 300 phone calls, and we still have many conversations here on the counter with people. We spoke to about 100 residents on Canada Day events. We're still going strong with our water conservation tips on social media, get good responses on that. And our pledge to reduce water use this summer to local businesses. Some of the companies that really responded positive to that were Daphne's Blue Heron and Secret Cove Marina. They all pledged to reduce their consumption over summer, and the meter reads will determine if that's indeed the case, but they actively promote and have implemented water conservation measures in their businesses. In terms of enforcement, several times a week, staff are patrolling areas where we expect or unauthorized use to take place, and staff are also noticing infractions during their day-to-day work. Last several weeks, we responded to 27 reported potential violations. Each of them has been followed up with a site visit. To date, 14 warnings have been issued. I have to check that number because I think yesterday there were several issued. So I think it's currently 17 issued and 1 fine. In terms of leak resolution, We focused on the major leaks, over 10 cubes a day, and we've been able to resolve some of them as well in the last several weeks. What about the contingency planning? Given where we are currently with our water supply, we don't see the need to start using Trout Lake this year because of the community impacts as well as the potential that additional measures are required because the lack of adequate filtration there, as well as the low number of days of additional water supply it would give to the community. In terms of environmental flow needs, we're close with Flinro, but since a couple of days, DFO also expressed interest in this file. They've not had any interest in setting the EFN for several years. Changes in their internally as well as in the Fisheries Act made them now being on at the table again. So that's another regulatory agency we now have to communicate with, which was not expected a month ago, that they were going to be involved in the way they are currently. What's the situation in Eastbourne? We're closely monitoring the situation. We'll be attending their AGM next week of the Community Association. But at the moment, there's no immediate need for any response there as well. And the rain helped them out a little bit as well this summer. I'm happy to take any questions.
Do we have questions? Director Lee.
A couple of curiosity questions. On the one graph, we had a targeted versus anticipated line. I was kind of curious about the difference.
The targets are in place already for several years, and those are the numbers we think are achievable and would be required to sustain a long duration drought in this for our water in our system. The anticipated amount is what we think that the community at the moment can actually achieve, and that's different because we know that there is still some non-compliance happening. We don't think the two are not in line yet.
So I think the goal is to try and figure out how to get it down then is what I'm seeing there then. Is that right?
Yeah, the more we can get it down, the longer we can stay at the lower stages. That's why we have to set the targets as they are, because we still feel that they could be achievable, and but we don't think that the community is there yet.
Director Tice.
I think we are meeting with Minister Donaldson at UBCM, and I think the environmental flow needs is not on the agenda yet. Is it? Can we confirm that?
All Water Sustainability Act related issues related to our water supply, including fast tracking of applications and EFN, are included in the scope of that meeting.
Right. So my question to staff is there any other way that we can do some advocacy around this? Because I think it's probably our lowest hanging fruit as to being able to save the most amount of water with doing with spending the least amount of money.
Thank you for the question. Given that we anticipate that the salmon migration will start early August that would be the trigger anyway to go back to 200 liters a second. So what the discussions we're now having with the regulatory agencies are all focused on, please allow us to get down to 120, 150 so that we can do the monitoring and see what the impacts are so that we can do a proper environmental flow need analysis according to the current protocols for that. So we have permanent improved environmental flow need in place for next year. So I think it's too late, and due to the rain events, it wouldn't have saved us a lot of water if we would have had it earlier this year. It's primarily due to the rain, but we really try to get it still in place as soon as possible so that we can get the data, so that we can support a more formal, long-term, permanent request for next year and the years after. So in terms of your question with respect to the UBCM meeting, I think it's worthwhile to bring it up so that at least any amendment that we're applying for will be processed in a timely manner for next year.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. I think it's probably important that at that meeting we have all governments here represented then.
Director Beamish?
I'm just trying to think the way through on the future. Do we have any idea right now as to how many development projects are going to be coming online for occupation within the next, say, 2 to 3 years within the service area, and how they might impact maybe moving the level 4 response sooner in the year? I mean, given the volumes that they might take from the system.
Thank you for the question. The impact of, let's say, if we would have hypothetical 100 households coming online, depends if there are more condo type or let's say half of them is condo. Condos are using relatively a low amount of water. You will notice it on the graph. The current demand in the system is such that the resolution of one leak will have a bigger impact than 100 households online. So that's why, because that's 10 cubes a day, that's 10,000 liters a day. That's equivalent of easily 20 condos or 25 condos. So that's why our focus is on those major leaks, because if we can solve them, we can free up so much space for more day-to-day development and mitigate any impacts that development might have.
So in the near term, in terms of positive impacts on the system, would be the metering, as well as perhaps if Gibson's will go off the level for Area 3, Zone 3.
Yes, in both cases, metering would allow us to identify more of the major leaks, while Gibson's Zone 3 would definitely make a difference here, especially during the summer. Thank you.
Director Seegers?
Thank you. I know in past we've talked about monitoring of the current meters that we have in place. Do we actually have the infrastructure, the software, whatever it is that's needed in order to do that and gather the information to help inform some of the decisions more?
What staff is currently doing is, at all the patrols we're doing that with our meters. So we're driving around, and the meter we have in the vehicle will immediately identify if there's a leak, because our meters are able to detect it, and will provide us with information on what's actually happening at that moment in the area. do we have sufficient sufficient resources to frequently do our meter reads, analyze the data, and analyze the data not only to identify leaks, but also to identify the higher users and use them also for that purpose? No, we don't. It's primarily the data we're currently using is really focused on identifying leaks. And until we have meters in place all over the coast in our service areas, we also don't feel that it is fair to target the metered areas, to treat the metered areas different than unmetered areas in terms of the use of the meters for compliance purposes.
Follow up.
But that would give all of us a lot more information. Yeah, I mean, not necessarily just compliance, but commercial users versus residential users, all of those pieces. So are you looking at bringing forward a budget proposal for next year's budget to fill in those gaps so that we'll actually be able to move that piece forward?
Thank you for the question. If requested, there has been staff have been attempting to work on a fulsome metering program, which would include online, that residents could online check their own water use, that we would have more frequent meter reads, that the data analysis would be improved, and that it would be more a fulsome program. So far, we have not been able to find the resources and to make it a priority that is required to actually do so. So if requested, we can definitely put a budget proposal forward for this year, which will be a multi-year process, but to improve our usage of the data and to improve the accessibility of the data by the community. Thank you.
Follow up.
When would you like that resolution put forward?
What's the question? When?
I'd like to make a recommendation that staff, that staff bring a budget proposal forward to provide the resources and the software and whatever is required to, you know what it needs to say, to move forward with monitoring of the meters that are currently in place and allow for the expansion for the additional that will be added.
Staff, please.
If I can reword it. That staff bring forward a budget proposal to develop a full, sorry for the word, a metering program, which will include software resources and metering program point. Then we know what we can include and we can define the scope in upcoming weeks and get on.
And it's seconded. That's good. Do we have any discussion, Director Lee?
I was wondering on the previous projects where we actually installed meters, did we include the need to do this in those projects?
Staff, please.
Thank you for the question. So far, the meters that has been installed always were installed with grant funding. Those grants never covered any development of software, instrumentation, etc., etc. So that's why we have meters without the fulsome program around it. So the metering program that I think is part that is currently at the table for discussion would also cover North and South Bender. It would not be limited only to the regional system, but it would be all meters are currently in place on the coast.
Director Seegers.
So further to that, would this be something that, given we're looking at the whole system, is it something that we could do an AAP for as well and include it in the borrowing that's required to actually put everything in place, given we're looking at watering, we're looking at metering, and we're looking at the infrastructure and software, et cetera, to be able to manage it?
Staff, please.
I think that's a fair question. I currently don't have, I have some thoughts, but I don't have a clear picture of, well-defined picture of what funding requirements for such program would be. So yes, that's something that we will consider in our budget proposal and go from there.
Do we have any further discussion? Okay, Director. Oh, on the motion that is currently on the floor. All right. Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? None. Thank you very much. That passes. Now back to general discussion. I think Director Hiltz was next in line.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much for the presentation. I think it really serves the community well on the board to have these frequent updates. So in the presentation, I wasn't quite clear about, is Grey Creek online or offline at this point, and what the conditions that Vancouver Coastal Health has put in to bring that resource online sooner than in the past. So I'm not quite clear on that.
Sorry for the fact that I wasn't clear. Grey Creek last year went online mid-August. This year, we've received, early this week, we received approval from Vancouver Coastal Health to put it online as soon as possible. So we're currently doing the work we needed to do to prepare it to go online, and expect it to happen in the upcoming days.
Director Theis.
Yeah, one more question in regards to the environmental flow needs. The two species of salmon that are returning early or late summer or early fall, as far as I've learned, were both introduced by the hatchery and are not native to that creek. And I'm wondering what the closure of the hatchery is, whether how that's impacting those salmon species.
Staff.
To add to that, it's not my understanding that the hatchery is permanently closed or is permanently will be closed every summer moving forward. They've closed for this year while they are finding alternative sources themselves in terms of their own well development, so that they continue their operations on the coast. I also know that there are discussions about the species they're raising up there. You're correct, pink. There always has been some pinks in the system, but not the populations that are currently there. So without the reintroduction of pink stock on a yearly basis by the hatchery, we expect that that population will decrease in size over the years. Those are things that we would need to consider in our more complete, comprehensive EFN analysis that we would need to do in the next several months. What is the development? What are the target species that DFO and as well as the ministry would like us to focus on, and what's the role of the hatchery there? Thank you.
Director Beamish.
Just like an update, last week the town of Gibson provided bulk water to Keats Camp, and I understand there's a problem there with Eastbourne, which you referenced. And what's the status over there right now?
Thank you. Eastbourne, we're doing some further analysis of the data we have about their water supply. There's currently no immediate need to initiate any action there. We're monitoring the situation, and the situation currently on Eastbourne is comparable with what they are used to. And we will be having discussions and work with the community this fall, next spring, to come up with more long-term plan for Eastbourne, and which will include more defined level of service, a discussion about the level of service we would like to have, and we will bring that, of course, forward to the board. The level of service, service level, so the amount of water provided per household, currently in Eastbourne is way lower than in the system, for the Chapman system. So that's why we want to have that discussion with them. As okay, what is reasonable here?
Director Seegers.
Thank you. I'd like to introduce somebody in the gallery here who I know some of you don't know. Darren Mulder is the Senior Drinking Water Officer for Vancouver Coastal Health. So this is the fellow we've been working with. Thank you for being here.
Thanks, Darren, for your collaboration in the last several weeks and years.
Director Hiltz.
Yeah, I'm going to follow up on environmental flows. I was walking Chester yesterday, and I forgot that Chester is a tidally influenced creek. It's quite significant. So the 200. So I'm wondering about where the data collection point in terms of the elevation.
Are you talking about Chapman?
Chapman. What did I say?
Chester.
Oh, sorry. No, Chapman. They're both probably tidally influenced. But I was walking Chapman. Sorry about that. Yeah, Chapman Creek, where the bridge is, and they're working on the water line. That's the place. So tidal influence. So in terms of environmental flows for salmon don't swim up to like 500 meters of elevation typically, right? They don't. So where is the data collection point for the 200 liter per second flow monitored? And so I'm wondering about the relationship between where the elevation data is collected and where the water needs to be provided for the fish. So that relationship.
Currently, it's a very good question, by the way. The monitoring point, the province is requiring us to monitor the 200 liters a second, and is at our intake, just below our intake weir. That's where there used to be a federal water survey of Canada stage, and that's about where we monitor the 200 liters a second. And that's also the most upstream part where the fish can migrate to. We also, in 2016, and even at where we are speaking here, we have our contractor monitoring flows at other stages in the creek as well. They were installed a couple of weeks ago by our contractor, so we currently have flow metering happening low reach as well, so that we can establish that correlation. So far, the flows downstream has been equal or a little bit higher than what they are at our intake.
Okay, I'm going to take a turn now. So in last week's Coast Reporter, there was a letter from someone wondering why we set watering hours only between 7 and 8 a.m. Now, as someone who doesn't like to be out of bed before 9 unless the house is on fire, I can really relate to this. And so I wanted to know if there is room for more flexibility in this schedule, and whether even we could start rewarding people who are on water meters by giving them more leeway.
I can explain here the why question in terms of changing the drought management plan and the related bylaws to allow for flexibility. I think that's a good discussion for this fall when we're doing our evaluation and look forward to next year's. In terms of the why, watering, especially hand watering, but any kind of watering for vegetables and plants in the early morning, actually the ideal time is 4 or 5 a.m. But we consider that to be a little bit too early for most people, most members of the community. That's actually the most efficient time to water plants, because if you do it in the evening, yes, it can be efficient, but you will also lose some of that water just to the ground, and which is not being taken up by the plants. So that's why it's in the morning. We set 7 to 8. We could consider for next year 8 to 9, but that's why it was as early as possible so that you have the least amount of evaporation. And in the past, the drought management plan sometimes allowed for 2-hour windows. But what we've noticed is that members of the community, as a result, are just watering 2 hours straight, which is defeating the purpose, because you don't need to water 2 hours straight by hand, because that's almost as if you're watering with a soaker hose or worse.
Director Hills.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to come back to kind of the difference of the sort of the aspirational goals and what the community has come up with. And one of the tools to encourage people towards the aspirational goals is the warning letters. So I'm just wondering, for the public, what is a warning letter help? It tells them that they're in a violation. Does it? How big of a stick is it in terms of, is it a kind letter? Is it, are we, I'm trying to understand, is it a registered letter? Like, do I just get this thing in the mail and going, oh, that goes into the, into the junk mail? Like, what's the impact, do you think, of the warning letters on the recipients?
Good question. The warning letters are designed as, it's not a legal letter. It doesn't have any legal status to it. It is a combination between supporting conservation efforts and indicating that if explaining the stage we're in and what is allowed and what's not allowed. So there's that component, because at that stage we still want somebody to comply with the bylaw without us having to do anything else. So that's still, of course, the initial effect. But it also includes that if repeated offenders can receive a fine.
So a follow-up. So could we interpret it as an invitation then to help people? And if they are having difficulty meeting the target, the public should feel free to contact staff and ask for assistance on how to become more aspirational, I suppose?
Yes, that's why we're following up on, if we receive a complaint, we follow up with a visit, because we noticed that having that one-on-one conversation is way more effective than setting up. It takes more time, but it's way more effective than sending a next letter, a next letter, a next letter.
Director Lee.
I have one question, and that's about the finding leaks and how to fix them, because we have to encourage the citizens to respond to the fact there's leaks. They don't have to, and a lot of them say that it's false positive, and there's all sorts of things that happen like that. I was wondering if we had ways to encourage people to address the fact that we believe they have leaks. For instance, like numbers of false positives and amount of change, like some sort of public campaign to say, hey, if we tell you got a leak, you probably do. Some stats, something out there in the public that looks after that part of it. Is there such a thing?
Thank you for the question. We have a lot of data. The number of false leaks, false positives, of course there can be false positive, but I think the number is quite low. What we could definitely do is see if we can, in upcoming weeks, increase our communication or focus our communication efforts on what we're doing with the leaks and the benefits of that and the amount of water we're saving with that. Thank you.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. With regards to the 7 to 8 a.m. watering, I think that should be something that we should include in our water discussions we have this fall, so that we can get feedback from the community about what works, what doesn't work, what we could do to help alleviate that. I know previously in other communities, typically we don't want people watering around supper time because it puts a big strain on the system, but we need to see what we can do to be responsive to the community's needs.
Director Hills.
In your presentation, you were talking about the connection between what happens down here at sea level, more or less, and what happens up at the lake, and there's not necessarily a strong correlation between those. So I'm down here, it's raining, means I might interpret that there's a lot going into the lake, and that doesn't seem to be a strong correlation. So in terms of what staff understand, what are kinds of the things that could help to connect the public, the demand side down here with the lake? Is there any ideas of what staff are talking about of ways to kind of reconnect what happens down here with the lake? Because there just seems to be a bit of a disconnect between what the public sees here, washouts, excessive rain, and up there it's not really making much of a difference. So any ideas?
I have ideas, but I think the more important thing is that it's not we're having discussions here about the lake, but I have to say that any rain event in a watershed, in the 16K watershed between here and the lake, can make a difference. The rain, as I indicated, the rain events, the 40 mil rain events we had here, was one of those spikes because it dumped a significant amount of water in the lower and moderate elevation watersheds, which still allowed us to close the lake 3-4 days more than we otherwise would have. So yes, it's not one-on-one relationship between here and the lake, but also not between if there's no water at the lake, then there's no benefit of the rain, because there could still be. It's a more complex story than what we're currently doing. It's more complex to explain than, and we've been thinking about how to explain that more thoroughly, and also how to improve our own understanding of that correlation. We currently we have some way to predict our supply, but it's not as scientific as it could. We don't have a fulsome water model that does it, and to develop a model like that will cost us several $100,000. So currently we're fine, we can manage, but we'll definitely look. I think over the winter it's a good time to think about how can we improve our communication about the understanding of the system. There's a good YouTube video which is on our channel about how the system works, and maybe that's something that we can promote in the upcoming weeks as well. And I'm every time relating to upcoming weeks because I don't expect a stage change, but it doesn't mean that we should not communicate about how our water system works or about water conservation measures. Thank you.
Okay, and I'm going to interject a brief commercial. I have a link on my website to the Tetrahedron Weather Monitoring Station, which is a place that you can go and see what rainfall is taking place up there, and a recent blog post on how much rain is enough with information provided by staff. So, do we have any further on this topic? Director Lamb.
I was just wondering if there's an update on the well farm that they're drilling, and anything with regards to the reservoir.
What I suggest is to touch base on, park those two questions for now and touch base on them when we do our Q2 report, quarterly report, which is agenda item 6 on the agenda.
Okay, I think it's time to move this along to the next item on our agenda, which is the Drought Management 2019 debrief process. And over to staff.
Thank you. This report is requested by the committee at last committee's meeting, and it provides a proposal for an evaluation with our community of the drought management approach we've taken this year. The intent is to do this fall at a point in time when we are sure that that the rain events, fall rain events, are back and our water supply is at normal winter levels again. To allow for an efficient and effective process, we described a process where there's an online component and 2 or potentially even more larger sessions with the community. The extent of those sessions and the scope of those sessions can be informed by what we learned from the online and the amount of responses we receive through that online component of the process. The current suggestion is to have a larger event in Sechelt and in Gibson, but we've had some discussions since this report was released that that second meeting could also take place in Roberts Creek. It's expected that those meetings could take place late October, early November, and they would really focus on the evaluation of the drought management plan, including what is permitted, what's not permitted, and as well as other water conservation measures. And the community could take and the role of the SRD in supporting the community in that. The timing of those sessions would allow the results to be incorporated in the budget 2020 process and in the drought management plan for 2020 that we're targeting to bring back to the report to the board early 2020. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I'm going to weigh in here for a minute. I really like the idea of the online portion because that's very helpful to people, especially if we have a lot of concrete questions to ask them about their water usage and how they found the drought management plan worked for them. I am a little torn about how best to meet with the community. In Sechelt, given the large number of community associations and the ongoing debate about water meters, I think holding a public meeting makes a great deal of sense. In the other rural areas, I am less sure. My instinct is that we should go out to the community associations because they came out to us the last time. But I realize that there may be some logistical challenges there. The Director Hiltz pointed out to me that there's only about 200 households in Area F that are on the regional water system. The rest of them are all on other water systems. So Area F is not the key. Upper Gibson's less concerned because they know that they're going hopefully to Gibson's water soon. About 3/4 of the audience at our Gibson's water dialogue was from Elphinstone. And there's a lot of concern there because we have 15% of the areas in ALR, and we have a lot of people growing food and gardening. So my instinct would be to go out to the Roberts Creek Community Association and the Elphinstone Community Association, which already have meetings, and do a presentation. I asked the president of the Elphinstone Community Association, and that was his preference. But the other option, of course, would be to have a special date and set it up at Roberts Creek Hall and ask the community to come to us. So I kind of wanted to throw it out there to the other directors to see what you think is the best way to go about this. Director Theis.
I personally like the idea of still having them come to us. Once you invite people to the community association, things get diluted a bit because there's always a community association business that also goes on at the same time. So unless you call a special meeting anyway. So I think the Roberts Creek Hall event sounds like the best idea to me.
Director Seegers.
I like the idea of having a big event like we did last time, but we could take advantage in Seashelt of, they call it SCAF. It's the Association of Community Groups, community associations, basically, because we have 7 community associations. So we as a council actually met with them Wednesday night? Wednesday night this week? No, it was earlier. Can't be Wednesday because it was Tuesday night, whatever. One night this week we met with them. We go as a council, but they have, 1 or 2 people who are designated from each community association who come to that meeting. So that would be just another point to take that out to their communities as well, because they have email lists, etc., of people in their community. So it's just another way to reach out, and it wouldn't require going to 7 different meetings.
Director Pratt.
And I'm happy with with doing a community event in Seashelt and a community event in Roberts Creek, because they make sense. If we have the dates ahead of time, and as well as the links, I think it gives us lots of time to connect and push those out to the community associations. Doing the online, I think, is key. We have a lot of online engagement, and we can, as long as we start, we have more time to consider this. We had a very tightened timeline over the water dialogues, but this, if we already have a date window in mind, and so we've got lots of time to push the information out. So I'm happy doing 2 events, and then maybe each one of the directors can make sure that they're pushing that information out to their community associations, or in my case, I've got a citizens association AGM at the later part of August, and that's where I'd be flagging it for them. And then we can also put at least put it in our directors' reports with the APCs and everything as well. So.
Director Hiltz.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm on board with the 2 meetings. It seems well, and the online component. I just go back to bylaw, the 310 review. We've had nearly 900 responses, so I think that seems to be a good tool. And a question I have for staff is the public participation toolkit. Is that been used as kind of formulating this, or I'm wondering about the alignment between the toolkit and how the dialogues and this have rolled out. Are they in sync, or how well connected are those 2 pieces between this action and what we have already as a toolkit?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for the question, Director. They're connected. The toolkit has one of the criteria for the toolkit in the participation framework is the impact of a certain policy or decision on the community. And in both cases, the impact is on the high spectrum, and which will lead us to having face-to-face conversations with people. And I think that also aligns with the intent of the meetings, of the dialogue meetings, where it was about a dialogue. It wasn't only about information sharing. And I think that's the same intent as we're seeing with the drought management approach meetings. It's having a dialogue and getting, in this case, I think for the drought meetings, it's even more getting input from them. What do you want to see? So that we get, so the online component, I see that more as harvesting ideas and harvesting topics, which will then lead it to a more well-defined scope for the meetings, where it's really, okay, what do you want from us? What is, if you have 10 suggestions, which one do you want us to consider most? Thank you.
So a follow-up to that. So would the online come first and then the meetings? So that would be the intent, is roll out the online first. Okay, thanks.
Yes, the online will go first, and then and we'll of course continue throughout the sessions, but first do the majority of the online, collect the input, and have that frame the discussions to be held at the events.
So there'll be multiple opportunities for people, either online or face-to-face. Yeah, okay, thanks.
And my question is, what's the timeline on the online? When do you think that would come in? Because, it's top of mind for people in August and then less so typically in September. So it's sometimes best to ask people questions when they're really thinking about it.
Thank you for that suggestion. And we haven't worked out the exact planning of this process yet, but we'll definitely take that into consideration. Thank you.
Director Lee.
I was listening with quite a bit of interest here. It appears that the discussion is a discussion with the community about long-term water usage and plans for the future. Really is what we're talking about here, with the idea, of course, that we're going to get ready for a drought next year. I was wondering if we need to include the Pender Harbor system and the Egmont system in these kind of discussions. Generally speaking, it's a little bit different topic because we don't currently have a serious issue. But the discussion is about long-term planning at this point. I was wondering if it would be worthwhile to have those kind of discussions, or is it too early for my area?
Staff, please.
Thank you for the question, Dr. Lee. As indicated in the report, the recommended focus of the meetings would be drought management 2020. It would not be water supply at large and expansion projects. This is too early to go back to the community with an update on where are we at with the wells, where are we at with the raw water reservoir, and how can we ensure that the long-term supply side is improved. First, those results will need to be brought back to the committee and then to the board, and then there might be opportunities to have that conversation with the community next year, spring, early summer. So that's why the focus would really be the evaluation of this year, moving forward, and looking to next year. That will be the focus.
Director Pratt.
Thank you. There's one thing that keeps on coming my way from constituents is the question around indoor water and indoor water use, which of course we can't other than the areas that are on meters. We can tell when they have abnormal water usage, but when we're looking in the concept of a drought management plan or water conservation plan as one of the as a focus, I know we can't really regulate what people are using on their water. We can't find them that you've watered your plants too many times today, but especially as we have some grow ops happening and they're getting a lot of questions around water usage that way. I think that we need to make sure that indoor water usage is included in this conversation in some way, whether or not it's just a question of how would you like more information on indoor water usage, or do you think when we're looking at the drought management plan that we should be asking people to restrict their indoor water usage? It's a question that keeps on coming up, that I keep on getting posed to me, primarily around the grow-op piece, but it's something that we do need to consider because there's a lot of water that's used within homes that it just goes down the drain, whether or not it's the teenagers with the 10-minute showers or 20-minute showers in some cases. But there needs to be more conversation around that.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. I think that's also part of the information we'll get when we go forward with, getting the software and getting the infrastructure in place to be able to monitor the meters. That'll give us more information up and down the coast.
Okay, are we ready to wrap? Director Hills.
So do we need to change the recommendations for staff to include the two face-to-face consultations or participation events?
Staff.
How it's currently worded allows for the online part and the events. So that's why in the process, as it listed here, includes both components. So I think there's no need to specify the events.
Director Seegers?
I'll make the recommendation as presented.
Seconder? Seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? Thank you very much. Director Lee.
I have one more question before we leave this. I had a very interesting discussion with Director Ties on the use of rainwater to flush the toilets. I didn't realize that you collect the rainwater to flush the toilet all the time. And if you don't have enough rainwater, it automatically switches over to the domestic water supply. So you can actually retrofit your buildings to do exactly that, to use rainwater when it's available. It seemed to me that was one infrastructure change that would be easy to do and quite valuable. I was wondering if that's something we would try and get in before next year.
Director Ties.
It's in fact difficult to retrofit. It's easy enough to do for new buildings. It's hard to retrofit because all the plumbing in your home is run on one system, whereas if you want to run your plumbing on rainwater or your toilets on rainwater, you need to set a separate pipes all the way to your toilets. So yeah, it's a little bit more difficult than that.
Staff, any comment on that?
No additional information other than already provided by Director Thijs. And grey water is one of the areas we are exploring in the context of tools and options we have available for reducing the additional input, additional pressure on a water system from growth as directed by the board.
Okay. What I'm going to do now, we're going to move to item 5, the Waste Reduction Initiatives Program, 2019 recipients, and then after that item, I think we'll take a short break.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to introduce Andrea Petrillo. She's our solid waste program coordinator, and she will introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair McMahon. This report provides a summary of the Waste Reduction Initiatives Program, which was launched by the SCRD in 2015. The aim of the program is to provide funding to community groups, nonprofit societies, charitable organizations, and school groups to implement projects that contribute to waste reduction or diversion in the region. This report includes information on 2019 applications and proposed projects. 4 applications were received, and all projects will receive funding. This report is provided to the committee for information. Thank you, and I welcome the opportunity to answer any questions.
Directors, do we have questions? Well, I have one. I'm just curious about what the North Thormanby Community Composting Project was. Sounds interesting.
The North Thormanby Community Association applied to expand their composting program as their current program of One Jora composter is at capacity and they have more food waste that can be diverted. So it's an expansion.
Director Hiltz.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, a question. Since the 2015, was there any trends that you're kind of seeing in? I see there's 4 applications in the past. I think there's been more. So, are the areas more in the composting side and the recycling side? Like, what is the community's finding gaps in services? So, if you have any trends that you've noticed.
Thank you for the question. If you look at page 15 of the package, there's a list of the number of projects funded over the years. That's been 5, 3, 6, 1. So 4 is in that range. In terms of focus, there's a strong focus on organics, which is interesting to see because it's good to see because it aligns with, I think, the current focus of the board as well. So there's a lot of focus on organics, but also on recycling. But organics is the primary focus of most applicants.
Director Lee.
I notice it is a relatively modest program, but is there statistics on the amount of waste diverted by this program? I noted that part of the application is to track what you save, but I don't see a report here saying how much we save based on the amount of money we invested.
Staff, please.
Thank you for the question, Director, and thank you, Chair. Part of the requirement for the program is that they are tracking what they're diverting, whether it is organics or recycling or whatever they're targeting. We don't currently have a report on that, but the information is provided with the reports that are required at the end and also partway through, so they have to report on how they're implementing the program, and then also at the end what it is that they've tracked and what they've been able to divert. So that isn't something we currently have a report on, but staff could if that was needed.
Director Lee?
I see that it's relatively small scale, but if we knew the amount for the dollars invested, it would kind of tell us whether if we did a big community-wide thing, what our savings might actually be. So it was a curiosity question, of course.
Director Pratt.
And it is a curiosity piece. It's a good news story, and I like to share those good news stories when we have the stats that can back it up, saying, hey, we invested $5,000 this year in our waste reduction programs, and these are the projects, and this is how much they've saved. I don't want to put too much, I'm like that short of emotion, but and asking for a report because I recognize the effort, but if I'm just wondering how readily available are the stats coming back after. So question to staff.
Staff, please.
Thank you for the question. Staff are also just discussing about what are we doing with the information. Currently, we haven't compiled the information from the last several years, and what we could do is we could explore, take a look at the information and analyze how we can use it in our communication with you, but also towards the public.
The other thing to keep in mind as well, depending on the project over the years, depending on how they're implementing the program, there may or may not be actual physical numbers as opposed to estimations based on we diverted this number of garbage cans, or so there's no actual weight for some of them, so it might be harder to compare, but at least the projects themselves have their own metrics where they show what level of success they've attained.
Good. Director Hiltz.
I can comment on having participated in a community association one about the composting, and the data collection is for the duration of the grant, and if a project started in 2015, there aren't necessarily the metrics collected for the subsequent years. And so there's a certain innovation aspect to this. I see them as kind of pilots and innovation, and as well as that kind of quantitative information. I think there's a lot of qualitative information that can be derived, like what are people interested in, how are they doing it, what did they learn, so kind of more of the lessons learned. So I'd be interested in that lessons learned kind of side of the innovation, as well as just the quantity. I don't think for me is as important as the qualitative, and that encouragement of and seeing the innovation in the community. So.
Director Pratt.
And just to tag on to that, with what's happening on North Thormanby, it's the success of the program that is needed, that has required the second composter, and they've had so much uptake, and because they have they've got one garbage barge a year to get everything off. Otherwise, you're packing in everything you pack in, you pack out off of the island. So it's any kind of waste diversion or anything that they can leave there to be composted it's a huge win for them, and they've had such an uptake on it, which is requiring the second composter. So it's the qualitative versus the quantitative. I mean, any kind of good news story coming out of these kinds of projects is really good to share.
Director Seegers.
Thank you. I like the idea of a good news story. I don't necessarily want to see staff spending a ton of time putting reports together, et cetera, to bring us feedback on a $5,000 project. But a good news story that they could take and share as part of communication would be great.
All right, have we exhausted this topic? I think we have. I'm going to call a 5-minute break. Thank you. Good, I think we can resume our agenda. The next item up is item 6, Infrastructure Services Department 2019 Q2 report. Any introduction from the manager?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to provide a little bit of insight in some of the highlights in this report. This report provides an overview of the activities the department has been undertaking over the last 3 months. Some of the highlights are that I can say finally our water main replacement project in North and South Bender has completed. There's been significant progress on the drilling of our second test well for a well field on Church Road. So the welling has been the drilling of the second test well was completed last week, and we're currently preparing for to complete a pump test in early August. During that 4-day pump test, there will be a lot of water pulled out of the aquifer. So what we're doing is we're setting up a station that the community can come by and fill up their own tanks with that water. We have staff there additional staff there to manage that component, and only the water that's not being taken by the residents will then be diverted back to the creek. In terms of the rebate program for rainwater, it was fully subscribed. 50 applications were granted for our regional system, one for the North Pender system and one for the South Pender system. The North and South, those were the first applications from those two systems. So we were happy with the overall uptake of the program. In terms of our transit department, we see an ongoing increase in ridership and revenue, which is really promising. In terms of the solid waste, there's a clearly noticeable increase in commercial waste being dropped off at our Shisha landfill, and there's a big increase in the amount of wood and gypsum. So it's primarily demolition related, and we see an increase in materials received from grow-ups. Some of the material was previously we know that it was previously brought forward as residential garbage, but we actually know that now we treat it as commercial because it's legalized, and that has further increased the commercial waste stream as well. Thank you, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions you might have on any of this.
All right, and I'm just going to mention to the directors as you're looking through and having any questions that we've been having informal discussions as a board about how much reporting is enough, because getting the information is really great, but, how much staff resources go into generating the reports that come to the board. So I think it would be helpful for us also to comment on the reports that we find most useful, and just to give some thought about what is most useful and how often is often enough. Is quarterly appropriate for everything? Whatever. So I throw that out. Do we have questions? Oh, come on. Director Seegers.
I have a comment and a question. My husband actually went to take some wood away this past week and went to the landfill and was told that Sailor Stalls was not up and running yet, and yet you're saying they are. So there's some confusing information out there, so could you clarify here and then perhaps with staff as well?
There's actually a report will be on the agenda for next week's on the wood situation at the landfill, because I'm sure that your husband also noticed that there's currently a big pile of wood sitting there. The quick summary, more details in the report for next week's meeting, committee meeting. Brief summary is while the contract was awarded by the board at the end of May, the contract has not been executed yet. It's about to be executed, and then after that there's still 2 months lead time for them to get up and running. So we're targeting that Sailor Stalls is up and running, will be up and running as of October 1st. So in the meantime, the report for next week the topic of that will be the approach. What are we going to do with the wood that's currently sitting at the landfill and at the Benetton station?
So there's a follow-up then, because that's an error on my part then, because my understanding of the report the last time was that it was moving forward then, and that it was going to be shifting fairly quickly. So I sent him to the wrong place.
Director Hilt.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you for the quarterly report. As I still consider myself newly elected, and I still find them valuable. Are there some things that I'd like to know once a year versus quarterly? Yeah, there probably are, but I'm still kind of feeling my way. But I am very thankful for the reports. And in particular, the Granthams community is very interested in what's going on. So I guess I'm wondering about the drilling. So originally, one of the ideas was to do another test well up near the Elphinstone Reservoir. And this test well is not far, I believe, from the original test well. So is this kind of more in a production well size, like the bore size, or we're still talking kind of the exploration aspect of it? So there's details about the actual size of the bore. And then people are in the community are wondering, is the distribution going to continue? The original plan was to increase the capacity of the distribution pipe from where the lower aspects of Church Road up along Elphinstone to the reservoir. Is there talk about it going behind now? There's some rumors that people wandering around in the woods with sticks, colored sticks and stuff like this, and there is a road right away behind that. So is that being contemplated? So there's the well itself, and then there's the distribution system, and where the facilities could potentially be located on the right-of-way or the park designation area. So.
Thank you. First thing is that I would like to explain is that we've spoken to staff, spoke to I think almost all the residents in the immediate area before we did the test drill, given the impacts it would have on noise as well as traffic flow in the area. And further communication will definitely happen with them over time. What happened, the test well that has currently, that was drilled last week is an 8-inch, which is one size bigger than the test well that's currently, that was drilled last year, which is a 6-inch. The reason to go for an 8-inch at the moment is that there was almost no cost difference. And if it's decided by the board to further develop this site as a well field, the 8-inch could be transformed into a production well as well. So that would be a huge cost saving for us. And the 8-inch also allows us to, during the pump test, to get a better estimate of actually the production yields we can get out of those wells. 6-inch is limited, so by drilling an 8-inch, we have more certainty about the amount of water that we can get out of the wells. That was the primary reason, and the reason that we could potentially use it as a production well in the future is an added benefit. In terms of why this location and not the original location we were contemplating is the accessibility of the site. On the reservoir location, it's a very steep area. We would have to do a lot of preparation to make that site accessible for a well rig, and that's the same on lot 11 on that area in there on the street, which is also owned by the SRD. There was a lot of clearing of trees and etc. required. The third parameter factor we considered was the impact on nearby septic fields. There's a certain setback we need to maintain of 30 meters from a nearby septic field, and the location now didn't require us to any exemptions to that. So it was long-term the most safe spot in terms of water quality as well. Thank you.
And the distribution aspect, is it still intending to go Elphinstone, or is that still an unknown?
It's still intending to go Elphinstone. People walking around in the bush with sticks were surveyors to actually determine that we would drill the well on the lot owned by the SRD and not on the MOTI right away, which is there as well.
So the drill site is SERD owned land?
Okay. Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Director Seegers?
Okay, so you're asking about the report itself. So there's 12 pages here. I find it fairly high level or higher level, and given the interest in the community right now around these, particularly water and solid waste, I'm okay with the level of detail, but I'm wondering how much time does it actually take to put this together? Like, is it days? Is it, is quarterly sufficient? Is it too much? Is it, given we're having other reports as well, almost every meeting now almost around water, do we need this one as it is?
In terms of the efforts to put this together, I just got a hint of the main person working on that, which is Tracy Elson. But it doesn't take a lot of time. It's more all the graphs. They're just Excel sheets, so that's no time to prepare. And the other benefit at the staff level to compile this is also for me as GM to get an overview of where all the projects. So I have to compile this anyway. So sharing it with you is not a real big additional effort.
Director Pratt.
I would just like to echo what Director Hiltz and Director Seegers have said, is that number one, being fairly newly elected, it's great to have the information. Number two, because of the level of community scrutiny, I'll say, it's good to have these details. And then because these are all projects that we heavily invest in, it's good for us to have it. It is fairly high level with some detail in it, but right now I'm really appreciating it, and if it's not a lot of effort to put it together, because you have all of the data and all of the projects already there, it's great to have it on a quarterly basis.
I'm just going to chip in for a second. As somebody who prepares reports for other organizations, once you've got it all set up and the spreadsheets are all set up and stuff, then just keeping it running is usually not a big problem. I personally love all the graphs. I love graphs. Very helpful. More graphs, charts, yeah, keep them coming. We had, Director Ties or Hills, who was going to, no? Ties.
I think, I can't remember if it was last week or at least at one of the previous meetings, we had a motion to bring back the report on the methane capture, and I'm just wondering if you've got an estimate as to when that report might hit our desks. Because I talked to an offsetting company, and they said they might be interested in seeing if they can make that a feasible project in the end.
Thank you for the question. As far as I was aware of the fact that the recommendation was made at last week Planning Community Development, and as far as I know, the recommendation has not been adopted yet by the board, so we have not taken any initiative on that yet. Thank you.
Director Hills.
I probably should have asked this earlier. It's about the pledge program. Can I, as an individual, take a pledge and get a sticker that I'm going to conserve water, or is it only commercial activities? Like, where is that pledge program? How do I get a sticker?
I can give you a sticker. I can just after the meeting, but it's currently primarily targeted to businesses, water-consuming businesses. Because, that's where the targeted on. If we haven't considered it yet for residents, but I think that's something we can definitely consider for 2020.
When I completed my stream keeper training, I got a badge, just like a scout badge or something. It's very, very cool. All right. Do we have anything further on this? I think we are complete for this item. So now we are on to communications. We have 2 communications here. We have a letter from the Chamber of Commerce regarding water supply, and we have a letter. Let's see. Is there an ask in the letter from the Chamber of Commerce? I know that there is an ask from Transportation Choices. They are asking us for a letter of support. So anybody, any comments on the Chamber of Commerce? Director Seegers.
Thank you. Number one, they're wanting to know financial resources available for the water projects that we have on the books going forward. I think that's pretty much it. So, they just want to know where we're sitting financially. I know.
That is a sort of a vague question. Director Hiltz?
I thank them for the letter, and to know how much money is in the kitty for these projects, I think would be a useful number to know. And I guess I'm sort of missing a little bit of detail in the letter. In the like number 3, it says expedited decision, and I'd be interested to know more details about what decision in particular they'd like expedited. And that goes into number 4, encouraging the board to not delay in decision. So I just feel there's a little bit of detail, and I'd be happy to make a motion to invite the chamber to come and maybe expand upon the letter. So that's kind of where I'm sort of thinking. To kind of flesh out I just feel it's not kind of concrete. Well, it's the discretion of the chair here. So that's kind of how I appreciate the letter, and I just find I'd like a little bit more information about details about decisions and the image. And I agree that from a board point of view, I think the uncertainty, I think, is this current term, the board is really trying to deal with the uncertainty and turn that into certainty. So I think if I was a person looking to locate here, I'd look at the current board as actually trying to take this uncertainty and turn it into certainty and create a future for us. So I'm happy to really listen to what the Chamber has to say.
Do we have any motions here?
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to invite the Chamber to do a delegation to the board and present some of their ideas.
I'm just thinking for a minute. Is that something that we can delegate to our chair? Do we need to go through staff to do that? Okay. All right. Do we have a seconder for that motion? Yep, we do. Any further discussion? No? Okay. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. Regarding the financial situation, I suppose we could ask Tina to provide us with a short report on what are our resources for water projects, what capital reserves we have associated with water. Okay, the motion has been made. Do we have a seconder? We have a seconder. Any further discussion? Director Lee.
We do have some reserves that we're going to use, I understand, but we also have plans on how to fund it as well. So maybe we want to give a complete picture of our intent to fund the program.
Director Seegers.
So it might be that we request information on reserves available on how much of those reserves are actually committed at this time to various projects.
I know there's no such thing as a friendly amendment, but that does sound like one. All right. Staff?
I would recommend a motion to include, to be worded something like, that staff provide a report to a future committee on funding opportunities or available funding and funding opportunities related to water supply expansion projects.
What he said. Good. Seconder for that? First, second. Okay. Any further discussion? All in, well.
Okay.
Okay. All in favor? Okay. None opposed. Thank you very much. Letter from TRAC. I believe we had handed out this morning the map in color, because you can't actually, it doesn't make any sense when all the lines are black. So TRAC is asking us to write a letter to our MLA supporting their request for increased funding of active transportation infrastructure on the Sunshine Coast, prioritizing areas where the shoulder of Highway 101 is less than a meter wide, as shown on page 33. Would anybody care to make that motion? Director Ties, do we have a seconder? We have a seconder. Any further discussion? Director Hills.
I'm still, I know there's shoulders, the color code, being a color challenged person with failing eyesight. They will provide more detail to the minister, I'm assuming. Okay, thanks.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much. That passes. I believe we have reached the end of our agenda. There appears to be no new business. So I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Oh, we're going in camera. I beg your pardon. The coffee didn't help sufficiently. So a motion that the public be excluded from attendance at the meeting in accordance with Section 90 sub 1 sub A of the Community Charter, personal information about an identifiable individual who holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee, or agent of the municipality or another position appointed by the municipality. Do we have that motion? Seconded. Thank you. All in favor? Thank you. All right. And now, before we go in camera, do we have any questions from the media?
I think the best agency to connect with is Vancouver Coast Health. They issued an order to not use the water supply for Keats Camp due to water quality reasons, and hence the contractor, operator of the system, I think activated their emergency plan, which resulted in Town of Gibson providing water and it being barged over. But Vancouver Coast Health is the best person to, best authority to connect there. It's always a combination between the two. With the larger rain events we had where there's over 10 millimeters of rain, that's definitely the rain that is helping us out here. Because with a larger rain event, as that's especially given that the soils, the ground in the watersheds is not that dry yet, there's a lot of, any rain event will automatically result in runoff, so an increased flow in the creek. So at this point in time, it's really the rain events that has helped us, and the community adherence of the community to the water conservation measures really supported that. Without, that graph would have showed significantly different, because there would have been otherwise way more days that we had to open the valve to ensure that we have adequate water supply. So it was the rain that was the primary factor, and the demand was the secondary factor. Thank you. It's a very good question. And it's hard to compare that on a detailed level because the weather is different every year, and hence also the timing of droughts and the temperatures, that there are so many factors. the water system is changing, leaks, the number of leaks is changing, so there's too many factors to actually do a good apples-to-apples comparison. On the higher level, I think the success of the drought management approach, but I think there will be topic of the debrief later this year as well, is to what extent have we been able to achieve that we have a guaranteed water supply until the end of the summer if we have an extended drought. I think that's that overall objective. That's what staff have been focusing on, and I think that's one of the primary goals, I think, to evaluate the success on moving forward. In very recently, the Fisheries Act changed again, and an amendment made to the Fisheries Act by the previous government was more or less reversed, and now, which resulted in them being more involved in. We changed their scope of their involvement, and as a result, they are now back into regulating flows on creeks of the size of Chapman, where they didn't used to be. So they're revamping or reorienting their own internal organization, and so this is, and I think, yeah. So that caused them to be now. They resulted in now them being. They wanted to be aware of what's going on. Doesn't mean that we need an authorization from them, but still we need to provide a lot of information to them. And given that they have not been involved in the file for several years, there's some catch-up to do there as well in terms of bringing them to the same level of awareness about the situation on the coast versus Flindro, who is very well aware. Yes, it will be non-potable water. It's comparable with what Seashield is doing. And more details about exact timing, etc., will just be distributed when we have that confirmed. So there will be news release on Facebook and social media, etc. But it will be available for anybody on the coast who wants it. Early August. Yes. The wood amount, for example, increased with 20% compared to last year in the first half year. So that's a significant increase. A bit more information on that also in the report that will be brought forward to next week's committee meeting. Soil and organic material, plants.
Okay, any questions from the public? Go ahead.
I don't know all the details about it, why, but I think the only thing I could say that the bags are always not clear, so I don't know the answer. But it's they need to get rid of it, they need to replace it, and they bring it to a landfill.
Okay, folks, I think we need to get into our in-camera portion of the meeting. Thanks.